Okay, shall we start with the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're gonna mess things up here a little bit. Mike, I understand you also scheduled a meeting for tonight?
Well, it's kind of, we have to, this is a formality for us.
Because you do not have a quorum.
Right, and all I want to do is call the meeting to order and to say that we do not have a quorum, let
Why
officially
don't you
we
go
don't
ahead
have
and
a
take care
quorum,
of
we'll
that?
close our meetings.
Why don't you go ahead and take care of that, and then
I
we'll
just
start
did.
this. Okay, boys, he doesn't waste any time, does he?
All
Okay,
right, sir, we're done? We're done.
we're done,
Now you
okay.
can do your.
All right, thank you. Let the record show that all members are present with the exception of Mr. Josick. Do we have any additions or deletions to our agenda?
I move the agenda be accepted as presented.
Support.
Motion and support to accept the agenda as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The minutes from our October 5th meeting.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
Motion and support to accept the minutes from our October 5th meeting as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, we have one item of unfinished business. We have a request for site plan review by Jenna Corbin.
Okay, as the chairperson stated, this is a unfinished business from the last meeting. The commission has basically reviewed the application and the site plan. There was one concern that brought it over to this meeting of the Planning Commission based on my report of the possible seasonal nature of the business due to the inability of installing a heating system. I've later learned that even though a heating system cannot be installed in the subject building and do that economically, they can continue to operate with the existing heating system and can also continue to operate with space heaters. So there's much less of a seasonal nature, I think, than I implied in my most recent report. Ms. Corbin is here, but I think certainly this can be dealt with as a year-round operation at this point. Any seasonal nature, this would be minimum, and frankly, we have a lot of seasonal businesses anyways. So. It's about the conclusion of my report from the last meeting.
Okay, Jenna, would you like to make any comments?
I don't think so, unless there's any questions or need answered or anything, I'm available.
Any questions from anybody?
That was the question I had, that was all.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. Any public comment on the request?
Yes, I'd like to know if the plastic that was put on the front of the building was going to be a permanent fixture for the winter, or do they plan on doing something to use the aesthetics of the building with just plastic covering it to keep it warm? Is that sufficient enough for heating from a building code standpoint?
Yeah, I can't answer that from the building code standpoint. I suspect if this is approved, it'll be conditioned upon meeting building code requirements. Otherwise, I guess we would have to otherwise direct your question to the owner or the operator, I should say.
When I chatted with Matt, who I believe is the building inspector, he said like as they stand, it was good. And so this was kind of just an addition, and they're also being sealed from the inside.
Again, that's one reason why we want to talk about zoning, village center ordinances, and that's a good example of it right there. If you go by and look at the building itself, the way it's put together.
Okay, any other public comment? Close the public comment. Board discussion?
Just a comment, I don't think we have a lot of control of what that looks like on the outside, do we? No, so, but I mean, that doesn't mean you can't in that center, so we'll be talking about those
Yeah, that's
things
what
later.
it's-
But I mean, I see you brought a lot of examples up at the other meeting you attended, and I think we can take a look at those.
Okay.
But we can't, we don't really have anything to do with that unless it's a construction code item that they have to meet. So if that was pink paper, that's the way it is. But you can review that and make some changes to that.
Well, hopefully we can do some things, and I talk about it anyways, at least food for thought, or down the road. But that's just one example of what's going on in the village center right now.
Okay, any other board discussion? Okay, we have a topo waiver request.
So moved.
Support.
Motion and support to grant the topo waiver. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, the general findings? Anything to add?
Nope.
Are we fine with them?
Yep.
Okay, specific findings under section 20.10A,
Matt.
B,
Matt.
C,
Matt.
D is not applicable, E,
Matt.
F,
Matt.
G is not applicable, H,
Matt.
I is not applicable, and J.
Matt.
And what is our pleasure?
Make a motion site plan be approved under the general findings and specific findings under section 2010, subject to meeting building code and health department.
Support.
Okay, motion in support to approve the request based on the general findings, specific findings under section 20.10, subject to approval by the building code and the health department. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Jen. Okay, we have a discussion with Tuscarora Township officials and community to review the impact of the downtown rezoning to Village Center Indian River zoning district and Village Center Indian River overlay zoning district. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. The way we're going to do this tonight is just have some facilitated discussion, and so I thought that what I'd like to do is just give a brief history as to why we're here today, and I think the button is there. Okay. We also have an aerial map over there. Anybody can get up and take a look at that if you like at any point. What I want to show you here is the Village Center zoning district. We had a great question before the meeting began as to whether this is going to talk about the widening of the street and the streetscape details. We're not talking about that tonight. It may come up as part of, it may influence the discussion tonight, but it's not why we're here this evening. We are talking about the Village Center rezoning that occurred. The discussion started in June of 2010 and ended about, I think it was maybe August of 2011 approximately, September when it became official. And essentially before 2011, this red area is all zoned commercial, and I don't know if you can see it very well from here, but this is Cressy Street, South Avenue, Mac, and you get the idea, and here's the river up here, underneath an aerial photo, also overlaid with the zoning district. This red area is all zoned commercial, and along most of the major corridors, highway corridors in the county, we have a red area which is a commercial zoning district. And that used to be what was zoned for all of downtown. What we were seeing was a lot of problems, a lot of variances were being applied for. The two main reasons were that we had setbacks that were being required. A lot of them were 20-foot setbacks from the front property line, 10 foot from the rear, and 10 foot from the sides. And as you know, being Indian River people, you know that a lot of the buildings are simply built right up to the sideline. Not all of them, but a lot of them were. So what we had is, this is a graphic demonstration. We drew lines on top of the buildings in the downtown, and we've laid this over an aerial photo and color-coded it for pre-2010, what buildings were not conforming with the current zoning at the time. All of the yellow buildings in some way or another had a non-conforming, in this case, these were non-conforming setbacks.
So when you have that many non-conforming buildings, something's wrong with the zoning, so we need to change it. The next slide here is are all of the buildings that are non-conforming, sorry, not setbacks, let's see here. Okay, that's just the other part, I'm sorry, this is the other part of the zoning district that we were looking at. So this is the south part down the Cressy Street of that same area. These are still all buildings that did not have conforming setbacks, again, under previous zoning. So most, if not all, but I think it's just most of those buildings now are conforming with the rezoning. And the essence of the rezoning was to allow for 0 setbacks in the front and on the sides. I think we still require a bit of like a 10-foot setback in the rear on most of these properties in order to have just a little bit of space. Those were the main differences, and that all that rezoning stemmed from a 2010, a number of 2010 workshops. I can't remember how many meetings we had on this. We had at least 2 meetings down here at this building to start the whole process. And then we had numerous meetings as we worked through some of the legalese of the language and some of the details later. But I think then in the end, we came back down here with the almost final draft version. We put the public hearing out. We had the public hearing here. And so we gave as much chance as possible, I think, to the local community to give input. And then there was some last minute changes. I think we ended up not restricting offices from the village center overlay at the last minute. There was enough concern that not allowing that was too restrictive for the overlay district. So that was put back in. All based on land use goals that were identified in some of those early meetings. The main ones being, let's have a downtown that's pedestrian oriented. Let's have on-street parking, primarily, not, obviously, there were some on-street, off-street parking being required for residential uses. Retail use emphasized at the street level. It's not restricting it to the street level, but it was basically saying we want to primarily focus on retail uses. When a person's walking down the street, they're going to see retail mostly. Again, these were the land use goals that we kind of that everybody came up with, including the public. Office uses were mainly trying to emphasize for second floor. I think in the end we ended up allowing them pretty much in any part of the building, but trying to emphasize that maybe it should be at the back of the building and upstairs, so you can still have access to it, but again, trying to focus on retail in the front of the building. With residential uses permitted on the second floor in the overlay district, a primary single-family home, I believe, is allowed in the overlay. Artisan residences were also something that was talked about, where you could live in your home and be an artist and sell your wares within your building, right on within the village center district. Outdoor cafe, sidewalk seating, and outdoor display of merchandise with more activity. Again, trying to focus on pedestrian activity so that when you're walking down the main part of Indian River, you'll have a lot of pedestrian activity. And what's nice about that is imagining the shopping district that I think people had talked about originally. You see a lot of other pedestrians, you think, hey, that must be a great place to go. You start having that kind of activity. You're a lot closer to your wallet if you're outside of your car and in the shop, so walking around is usually better for businesses. But again, those are some of the land use goals that were identified back then. Some of what has come up since then, and I think there was some confusion, especially back when we were starting to look at Jenna's project there. Back again in 2010, 2011, when we were looking at some of the ordinance amendment changes that need to happen, one of the things we talked about was salons and spas, because there were at least a couple in downtown. We did an existing land use study and located all the different land uses that were occurring already. Salons and spas were one of those things that people felt like should stay there. When we started defining those, we realized the definitions we were writing were so close to both retail services, retail establishment services is the definition that we have in there right now, and office space. It seemed like we had 3 different words for basically the same thing. So what we did is we combined a lot of those like salon and spa type of things. Basically, it could probably be either retail services or, I believe we ended up creating it as offices. Isn't that kind of how we ended up? So they are determined to be offices: health, real estate, education, social, similar services. So there is some room for interpretation here. We try to be as predictable as possible in a good zoning ordinance so people know what they're getting into. developers know what they're allowed, not allowed to do in an area. So this office definition was meant to be a little bit more all-encompassing. May include some things that people won't traditionally think of offices, but it seemed so similar to the other one, we ended up combining them. Maybe it caused some confusion, hopefully not. One of the other things that we heard from the public, and I think that's what spurred this meeting, is some concern that some of the restaurants that were coming in weren't necessarily predicted. It wasn't necessarily thinking that we were going to have an open-air restaurant. And I have to be honest, when I was thinking of restaurants, I always think of them mostly as indoor, except for food trucks. And we knew we didn't have anything in the ordinance at the moment for food trucks per se. So we were looking into something that more clearly defines that. And this is a definition that's proposed right now. We're still working through this. This isn't actually part of the ordinance yet. It's a proposed definition. And this clearly establishes that a restaurant, as you think about it, is something within a principal building. It is common in some areas to put within a principal building, within your use definitions, to be really clear. Are you imagining this to be something that happens within four walls, or are you imagining this to happen out on the sidewalk or in the open air? So this is one proposal, is to add that language in there so it's a little clearer, and then also come up with some other language. And I don't know if I have that in here yet. Yeah, so that's right, I did put this in there. This is a proposed definition for a mobile food unit. They may, most likely they'll have slightly different regulations. They may not be desirable in some areas, and they may be in others. So at least we're going to have a definition established for that, and then we can decide where those will be permitted. So basically a mobile food unit is a temporary establishment that's a vehicle-mounted food service. Food truck, similar to the things you've seen already downtown. They did meet the definition of restaurant because our current restaurant does not say whether it's in open air or in a building. So they were approved by the Planning Commission. I think it was just last summer or spring, about that time.
I think so.
So if it meets the ordinance, the Planning Commission has to approve it, and that's why those were there. And may have limited outdoor seating. So again, that's a proposed definition that's being reviewed by the Planning Commission, and that's some of the history is why we're here today. I've got a couple slides here if we want to, if people have specific questions, but one of the things I thought we'd do is kind of go through and see what has been working. I think we've heard from a couple of people, but we wanted to find out, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm saying we on behalf of the Planning Commission, but I believe that the Planning Commission wanted to know a little bit more about whether or not any changes were really desired, what were some of the concerns. Some of the concerns, as you shared earlier, zoning may have a secondary impact on aesthetics. You try to do what you can to make sure your town looks good and is desirable for people to visit, but we don't necessarily, clashing colors, we don't regulate that type of thing. A lot of zonings just simply won't do aesthetics directly. That's not necessarily what it's designed for, but maybe indirectly it can handle that type of thing. Some zoning ordinances go into more specifics about style of building. We do to some extent, given the type of roofs that we allow. The county zoning ordinance says that, and some areas don't allow for flat roofs, some don't allow for mansard roofs, and ours do, but in some areas where you're trying to control a common look and a common theme in an area, some zoning districts do take that on. I'm not proposing that tonight. I'm just saying what zoning ordinances can and can't do as far as aesthetics. Broken windows and windows that aren't working, that type of thing, just to take your comment to an extreme, aren't necessarily something that a zoning ordinance would handle, but there are maybe either dangerous building or property maintenance codes that can be adopted by various entities. A lot of that type of thing, like blight ordinances, can't be done by counties. They have to be done by cities, villages, and townships. That's state law that allows only cities, villages, and townships to do that. So those are just some examples, but I guess at this point, unless anybody has any questions about where we came from to get here, maybe it's just important to hear from the public, and or I don't know if planning commissioners have any comments or any other direction they'd like to provide for the public, but I think it's the time to hear from the public to kind of find out, is this something that the community in general feels like there's some change needed? It's a rare opportunity for us, and as a planner, I think this is the first time we've had a public meeting where we really, that I've been part of, where we've really focused on a 5 or 6 year old zoning ordinance amendment and had a chance to review that and say, hey, how did it go? Because you can't predict for everything in a zoning ordinance. Nobody's perfect, and this one isn't either, but we can always work to refine it. That's why we're constantly doing amendments. It may be kind of a problem, it may take a while, but it is something that keeps it current. I think Emmett County rather recently redid their whole zoning ordinance over a period of 2 years. Not proposing that tonight right away either. At least we can talk about Village Center tonight. So unless there's anything else from the Planning Commission, maybe we could just start hearing from the public, and I'll let Patty kind of control that one at a time.
Okay.
So what worked and what didn't work about Village Center? Any comments about what you liked or what you saw that didn't happen? You can always start with what you liked about it too. That sounds good.
I'm waiting to see if anybody else has.
Yeah.
That seemed to be the one.
I'll start the conversation, Carl Muscat, if I may, Patty. There are several things I like about it. Number one, it is enabled 2 existing buildings to be utilized that otherwise would not have met parking requirements under commercial zoning. So I think that's a plus for the community. I do think it's more flexible zoning. I would like to see maybe some little tweaks as far as the residential and stuff, because Steve did mention residential, and I think that's an important part of a downtown if you want to create something that's pedestrian friendly. I noticed the Indian River District actually requires within the residential, or the overlay requires that the residential be supplemental to a commercial use on the parcel. And I would think, that would disallow Ms. McCluskey's house. It's a separate standalone, and a couple other houses within the district. And, I wouldn't want to see a lot of houses necessarily right on the main drag here, right on South Straits Highway. But, and I think within the top of the B overlay, because I participated in some of those hearings, I think we also allowed residential on the first floor back 30 feet from the front of the building, which gave people an option of not having to have a second-story residential. They could have a rear building residential, which might be something in Indian River we want to look at. It encourages more people to live downtown, certainly. So, thank you.
Yes.
There's a couple of good examples from last summer. One of them would be right next to the bridge. Spent a lot of money on the bridge. It looks beautiful. We replaced it 2-3 years ago. Well, right next to it, there was a strip really not big enough to do anything with, but now it's full of sand. It's got an old pontoon boat. There was never any garbage cans there. Supposedly, it's a food business. They don't have bathrooms, so they use our public restrooms across the street. And now there's nobody there. It didn't work, and we've got a lot of sand and an old pontoon boat to deal with, right smack in the middle of our downtown area. Not the Planning Commission's fault, because by the way our verbiage, I would have approved it, but we didn't know what was coming. And now that person, now we're looking at this thing every day when you come into Indian River. That's what greets you, is this, tiki bar, whatever it was supposed to be. It didn't work out. Down another block, next to the ice cream store where the gentleman wanted to go ahead and serve food, he brings in like a 25-year-old old trailer, puts it in there, and because he plumbs it, it's okay to serve food out of. I've got 25 years in the food business. It's not okay to serve food out of. It's got to be inside of that. There's a lot of sanitary things you got to deal with when you're dealing with food. And so now what we've got is an old trailer sitting there that wasn't used all summer. We've got a pontoon boat on sand that's an eyesore. And those are the kind of things, I think, either there should be an exit strategy when these things don't work out, when people come in and say, I want to do this. And so we go back and say, okay, fine, it didn't work. Now clean out the sand and get rid of the pontoon boat, and let's get back to where we had a green area there before. So, there's nobody to blame in this room, but those are things that happen, and if we had more teeth in something, maybe those wouldn't happen.
I think the other thing, to expound on what John was saying too, if we did a better job of vetting these businesses as far as finding out, how long they, looking. I know you're not supposed to look at their financial background or what, whatever, but if we could vet these businesses coming in a little better and what they plan in the long term or whatever. I mean, we got 2 buildings now that, not buildings, but 2 trailers that supposedly fall into the food truck part of it, because they both have wheels on it, and that's kind of what I was told. The one guy with the trailer, he put it over there with a crane. He can't move that without moving it out of there in the crane. He was open maybe 3 weeks out of the summer, or a month at the most, and talking to his neighbor, he was hardly ever open or ever there. So I'm just saying is, I think, and I agree with John, it's nobody's fault, because when I went to the meeting when those were approved, it met the, the criteria. So I'm glad, we did get some feedback that you came down here, and maybe we can take a look at definition of restaurants and food trucks. I think we need to have some kind of, split between the 2 of them, because those 2 would fall under, to me, the food truck definition, because they have supposedly wheels on them. But again, the guy was open maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I know at the time, talking to Scott over there, that maybe we should have done a better job of checking them out, because I know there was a lot of problems with the next door neighbor. They put up a fence, they had people moving back and forth between the 2 of them, arguing and fighting. There was no boat parking there. It wasn't, I guess, well thought out when they were put in. So maybe down the road we can do a better vetting process of some of these businesses coming in there, even though it was legal, because you can use 20 feet, and it was, put in, with a well. I guess he had a well in there, and it was approved to use the public restroom, which I thought was a stretch, but I think in the future we need to do a better vetting process on some of these businesses, ask a little more questions on how do you plan on staying open all summer, or what type of food you're gonna have. And I know this may be not your forte to find out whether you think they're gonna stay in business or not, but now, like John said, we got 2 buildings here, or 2 trailers that are sitting in the middle of our village center, and we're trying to bring in business. I heard the other day that the dollar store was sold, and the person that bought it says she's gonna fix it up pretty nice. Luckily, we have somebody in town that thinks they can do something here. And, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of outsiders coming in. They see stuff like that coming in there. And maybe that's our problem and not the planning commission's problem. Maybe the businesses, which I brought up last week at our meeting, need to have a little more pride in what kind of business they, their facades and the flowers out in front. I mean, we've had a struggle. The DDA and the Chamber of Commerce have had struggles with a lot of the businesses in this town to keep up the front of their business. So if they cry they don't have business, take a look at the front of your store. You can see why you don't have business. So a lot of it falls back on the business owner and their DDA and their chamber to work a little better too. It's not all your fault for approving some of this stuff, so I do give you that much credit, and I understand where you're coming from. But the other thing I wanted to bring up too, that we talked about last Wednesday, is that there is a lot of code violations, especially in signs. And I know the township, and I may be speaking for the township here too, is that they offered to help pay for a code enforcement for the area at one time. And they've never been, taken up on that deal, that they would help pay for somebody for Indian River to do, enforcing the code, especially in the way of the signs and some of the other violations that we have here.
Yeah.
But again, it all falls back on pride of business owners too. I mean, some of the things that are in here, if you look at, I know they legally meet the standards, but if you want to bring business in town, you got to do a better job with some of this stuff, so. I guess, that's about all I got. I guess most of it's been covered, what we talked about the other day, so.
In back, I'll get to you, Craig.
I agree with a little bit of what Mike and John have said here. I think that we could do a little better job with clarifying these definitions between food truck and restaurant. I think that a lot of the problems that you two have mentioned are going to be self-correcting. These businesses that aren't running a good business just aren't going to be around that long. I don't know that vetting these businesses that they're looking to come in, or cleaning up after businesses that have left our function of the zoning, I think that's something that needs to happen locally at township level, or like you said, with the chamber, that kind of thing. I think we need to be very careful about condemning a concept based on a couple of individuals' poor execution of that concept. Just because we've got a couple of these mobile food units in town that maybe aren't up to the par that we'd like, I think we need to be careful about condemning that concept on a broader scale. That's really been a high-growth industry over the last few years throughout northern Michigan. So I would like to keep that in mind as we go forward on this.
Okay, could I have your name for the records, please?
Matt White.
I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure. It's been a
Shade
while.
Ruth.
Can I ask,
Yeah, tomorrow.
how would that, can I ask, how would that happen? How can you, keep something from what the pontoon, and a food truck, how do you make it so we don't end up with what we had, but still allow?
I think that you could, in layman's perspective, but I think that you could restrict, well, first by clarifying between a restaurant and a mobile food unit, and then restricting the problem areas that are associated with food trucks, the location, hours of operation, nuisance noise, blight, that kind of thing. I think if you had a fairly specific set of criteria for these people to meet, and a specific division or a specification as to what category they fall in, it would be a lot easier to enforce.
And you could talk to your township attorney about local ordinances that can regulate licensed businesses in that way. I think that's something that the township could do in addition. I think it's, weren't there some food truck ordinances that we read where there was a city ordinance and a city licensing of the food trucks?
Yeah, cities and villages, they have powers to license.
Probably
Except-
townships do?
But I don't know
I
if
don't
know.
townships
Yeah,
fall
I don't
into it.
know about that.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know about townships, yeah.
The township also has the ability to enforce a blight ordinance. The
Right.
county does
Yes.
not.
We know
Right.
that.
But
Went through that a
when-
few years ago.
If I
When
may-
they've been given the okay to put something in according to zoning, then it becomes difficult to then say it's blight.
Well, it may be blight though, if it's not functioning any longer and doesn't look like it's going to be.
I'll go with that.
Then it could become a blight question.
One thing that would help considerably is if we narrow the definition of food trucks. And I'll give you a really good example. Go to California, taquerias, they're every place. Well, they were every place for a while where people were stealing Kroger carts and an umbrella and opening up the taqueria. I mean, that was their mobile food cart. So here, I think if we look at things, if it doesn't have a motor and it can't be out of there, then it's not a food truck, you know. And I think we need to look at that. It's either a restaurant and not mobile and it's brick and mortar, or it's a food truck, which means they can pull in, they have a license, they go through the same thing all of us business owners do, and they can park there, just like that spot next to the bridge. Had that been at like a taqueria truck or just a great old food cart or something that was mobile this summer, it'd be out of there now, it'd be great, it wouldn't leave an eyesore that it has, and that would have worked great, you know. This ain't no difference with the trailer next to the ice cream store. You know, if you're gonna have a building, then maybe if we narrow the definition, if we approve it, we wanna see what you're gonna put in there. Show it to us before you put in, you know, not just say, okay, let's, you know, whatever that is, we can haul it in here and paint it white or brown and put plumbing in and we call it good. But I think if we just narrow the definition for food trucks, that's gonna help a tremendous amount in the future on what's gonna show up.
Did you
We've been
put
working
it
on
on
the
the-
definition
We
of
have
the food
been.
truck
Wait.
for the last 3 or 4 meetings now.
Yeah, we have.
Maybe we could bring that definition
Health
back up,
department
Steve.
It's gotta be a licensed STFU to qualify.
If
I
you guys
mean, that
picked up
would be your limitation right
these, the
there.
new definitions that we're working on are on the back of it.
There's a stack of them over there if anybody wants to grab one.
Yeah, to clarify, right now, the planning commission is working on a ordinance that would deal with what we're terming mobile food unit. You can see right now there the definition that we're working on. The ordinance that they're looking at right now proposes them in commercial zoning districts only. So that would not include the village center districts or frankly any other zoning districts, just the commercial zoning district. The way the ordinance is set up is that they would be allowed by zoning ordinance, by a zoning permit making sure that certain criteria on whatever spot they pick is met, like parking requirements and parking based on how many tables, if they have tables or don't have tables, specific signage requirements, of course, permission from the owner and things like that. So that's, in general terms, what they're looking at right now. And as stated, the definition up on the screen right now is the definition that we're currently working with.
Okay, Craig?
Yeah, I think there's a definition or possibly an issue in the middle of those two, because what if they just took the wheels off of those two? We're calling them a mobile unit, but for instance, the ice cream store down there doesn't have much indoor seating, I don't believe. Or what if you had takeout or some sort of a restaurant, or we don't have a definition, I think, in between, because you can have a brick and mortar building that's a small building that can have takeout windows and outside seating. And I think we just have to, I'm not saying whether it should be in that zone or not be in that zone, but I think there very well could be something in the middle of these two. It seems to me that a mobile food unit, maybe we can clear an awful lot of that by making that a licensed and legal vehicle that could be on the road. I mean, I think adding the definition alone would probably clean that up a lot.
Do you have this one? Yeah, in fact, there is carry-out.
Yeah, there's quite a few other definitions that we're working on right now. Carry-outs, drive-throughs.
Because we just hadn't talked, we put up the restaurant with indoor seating and then went straight to mobile, but
see, right now we have just restaurant.
If we limit the mobile, can they just take the wheels off of them and say, now we're a takeout restaurant?
It all depends on,
We have to be careful
exactly
what we wish for.
Well, yeah, and we've offered the definitions as we're working on them right now. We have them there and trying to address a wider array of restaurant type uses.
So with this and some of the other definitions that you're working on, that would eliminate a trailer being plopped down? Or are we not to that?
Depending on which zoning districts you apply the different definitions.
If a mobile food unit is allowed in an area, I think it is a challenge to, I think the language that has been crafted here is to be readily movable without disassembly.
Which would do away with the trailer next to the Dairy Queen or the ice cream establishment.
Well, aren't these?
Because they're fastened to the ground, it's not readily movable. It's plumbed in.
Yeah.
Yeah, plus he takes a crane to get it in and out of it.
Exactly.
It's hard to make an argument that that's readily movable.
Yes. If you look at your definition of a restaurant, it says it's an indoor seating too. You have to have both indoor, basically, and maybe you can adapt it to show indoor and outdoor seating.
Yeah.
But you have to
Maybe
have
it
some
needs to
kind of
be
indoor.
self-contained, or I don't know what.
It might meet the definition of a carryout, though.
Right.
But if they take the wheels off the trailer, would it necessarily not meet, or would it meet the construction code
No,
requirements?
no.
Which
The minute
means-
they take the wheels off, then it doesn't meet, then it falls under construction code. The problem with the unit, both units that you're worried about, is that they don't have to meet construction code because they're mobile. As long as they got the wheels under them, they're technically mobile.
Yeah.
The minute those
But we
wheels
don't
come
have
off,
but we don't have an ordinance that says you could have a mobile restaurant, and that's what you're working on now, so it
Correct.
fell under the definition of a restaurant, even though it's mobile.
which is why we're reviewing and
Yeah, that's what,
rehashing all
that's
these
the
definitions.
reason why we're here trying to sort it out, so.
We should
No,
do
this
this
is
in a
great.
lot more townships, just so everybody has the experience of what you guys go through every time.
No, I don't,
No, this is what has to happen in this
No, I
kind of
know,
process.
and I really appreciate it, I think most of us really appreciate you guys coming down here and talking to us
I think when it comes
having
to
dialogue.
in regard to these kind of discussions that we've had, particularly with mobile food lately or whatever, been along with it, we're our own worst critics.
Yeah.
We have 9 really independent.
Okay,
When it takes that they, you know, and you're still gonna miss stuff like we
Yeah.
did last time. I mean, I guess,
Go ahead.
there's new uses popping up there all the
Well,
time.
you know, you
can't-
start out with the wording in front of you, and you kind of think, and you have this preconceived notion of what that means. But somebody else reads it, you and I, Craig, might read it, and both come up with totally different interpretations.
But I think when we put the village center ordinance together, nobody visualized what's happening. And all of a sudden, we got 3 different businesses heading within a year of each other that basically fit in there. And none of us visualized that was gonna happen, but, you know, we all had different visions, because we never had a problem for 4 years. And all of a sudden, boom, 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 we got 3 of them, and go back and, well, we should have probably been more definite in our definition back then. Nobody, it always happens.
You need, nobody knew.
No, but, you know, you have to have the experience first to make that, that's what laws are made.
And that's
I think,
why we sit
sometimes.
here and
Yeah.
hash them out.
Exactly.
See what we can do to correct the situation.
Right, no,
Or
like I
improve on
said,
it.
I
don't
think this
know
is
that
a great
completely
format
correct
that
it.
we're doing tonight.
I do think that the parking requirements, the easing of that has been a godsend.
That's
for
been a
lot.
plus.
I mean, I think we had to have that, or it would be just totally dead now.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see the activity, I'm just not sure that some of it turned out.
What about the zoning laws that are applicable to parking a trailer longer than a certain number of weeks or months on the lot?
For a recreational vehicle, that wouldn't apply to this
Are you
business.
talking,
For the restaurant, you mean?
for a restaurant, or are you
Yeah.
talking about personal use of,
Well, right now, it's not a
Camping
restaurant,
trailers.
it's just a trailer sitting there. I mean, it's
Well,
nothing.
So maybe it qualifies as outdoor storage now.
It's a
Where's the
restaurant
code for
use is
it?
what they apply it for, so they've converted it to a restaurant use is essentially how it is.
Is that their license in there as a restaurant or as a?
those are the storage.
Uh,
Good question.
Health department licensing? I don't know. Was it licensed under a mobile?
Yeah, I'm sure the health
Both those
department
were
had
If they're licensed as a restaurant, wouldn't they have
As a
to meet all the
restaurant or
restaurant requirements?
They're different, they're SDFUs, there's mobile food, there's temporary food, there's all different types. There's about 5 different designations for temporary or mobile.
And these were approved as,
They were approved as, they were both different,
okay.
but they were licensed, they had plan reviews, they had to put wells and upgrade sewer and put grease traps and all that, but they didn't have to meet any construction code standards because they kept them on the wheels. So they didn't need footings, they didn't need fire suppression, they didn't need any of the things that anyone else would have had to do with a building that had a foundation. So they kept them on wheels, so those guys couldn't even look at anything inside of those.
So if
Construction
we,
code could not.
No, yeah, construction code
But
could
wouldn't
not
they have to
be,
meet Michigan Department of Ag and, I mean, wouldn't they have to meet the inspections of the
they have to
restaurants?
meet those, but those don't include the construction items. You know, they had to have a hand wash sink, and they had to have water, and those kinds of things, they had to have certified operators, but they don't have to meet the other outside construction standards. Even the electric, they could have whatever they wanted inside, as long as the connection outside was acceptable. Same with the plumbing. The sewer, the same way. They didn't look at, we looked at plumbing, the health department, but none of that stuff could be looked at because it stayed on wheels. So they were smart to do that. Because they didn't want review of those folks.
Might be a good franchise concept.
One of the uses that was brought up early on too, that was desired, that I heard, or at least somebody was looking at it, was the laundromat idea. And I think it was a laundromat with a bar attached to it or something. I think there was, I don't think I'm sharing that out of school.
Grass rail
That
garden.
was yeah, so, and so that's the other question. We're talking about things that were let in that maybe aren't, that we need to tweak a little bit. But how about any uses that you've heard about that people have been turned away and maybe we need to look at those as desirable? Was that, one of the things we talked about early on was that a laundromat was less pedestrian shopping oriented. And so in the overlay, it wouldn't be desirable, but everywhere else it would. And I think it just so happened that soon after that, somebody was looking at a property in the overlay for a laundromat with a bar attached to it, which is common, in, not common, it's seen in college towns where you want to have a beer one. Or maybe, I remember that. Or in a vacation area where you're on vacation, but you're there for a long time and you need to do your laundry, but you still want to shop. I don't know. Was that a serious interest that anybody heard about?
He was, yes. He was. In fact, we had 2 two inquiries about it, both the winds overlay. And, well, we couldn't do it. So, it was a good concept, and Sue and I argued about it, because it was, in one place, it would be a good fit to be hooked up to the bar, but there was no parking. You're right, it's not a pedestrian shopping oriented business. So she won that argument.
I think, like you said, they're thinking about exit strategies when something doesn't work, and you've allowed it. And then in this small town, it's not a college town. I just didn't
I think some of those uses could be acceptable as long as they were, those parking in the, I mean, they could, I think you could conceivably connect it if it was in the back off street and you came in with parking the appropriate, but I think the whole reason for the overlay district was because we didn't have setbacks and we didn't have parking, was to create small retail operations. You know, and yeah, to work around the existing and try to create a village center. And some of those things, well, we need them and we want them in our town. That just isn't probably the right location.
And what you're doing, though, by not allowing that laundromat in that particular area. Right now, we have State Park, we have KOA, and there, and all these people that are coming here and staying here for a good amount of time are going to different towns, but I want sticking around here, there's no limit.
So the question is, do you allow it in the overlay, or do you, it's still allowed in other
There's
areas?
plenty of places to put one.
Yeah.
We have this
Like
little
that, you got a lot of places that are
For sale, and so there's a few places that are for sale in that area that, you know, we're dictating what them people can sell their place. Establishment.
You do that with any zone, I mean, that's what zoning does.
I just wanted to comment here that actually within Village Center Indian River District, special use permit does allow dry cleaning and laundry establishments. So I wouldn't dissuade people from attempting to do it.
Not in the overlay.
Not in the overlay.
Not in the overlay.
No, but we're discussing both districts.
Oh,
Yes,
there's plenty of places.
Yeah.
There's lots of
The
places.
zoning, or the village center, which is not the overlay.
Well, Village Center's only a couple blocks, I mean,
Well, then you
It
could
just so
have-
happened that the request early on that I'd heard about was in the overlay for a long time, so that's why I wanted to.
In a case like that, it seems to me that comes to a value judgment. I'd rather have a laundromat and a bar attached to something where it's currently not allowed, in place of a vacant building, that you hope
yeah.
that a
I
business that
would-
meets your particular
That's assuming it's a vacant building.
specific desires or whatever.
Well, the whole
To move in,
purpose,
maybe?
the whole purpose of the village center was for trade-offs. You allow more flexibility with the parking, you eliminate some uses that require parking. I mean, that was the whole concept. So
That was.
Yeah.
you can't have it both ways. You can't turn around and have a village center and then put in something that's parking intensive and take up all the street parking.
And I think we had a similar discussion when we were talking about whether or not to allow offices, because, you know, one of the things that zoning can do is to help you achieve long-term goals. Like that, if you eliminate some of the uses that are gonna impede pedestrian shopping district by putting an office in, you're eliminating that person's right to use their property and sell it and rent it as an office. So that eliminates a short-term goal for a long-term goal of hopefully someday somebody moves in and creates a pedestrian retail. Some downtowns take that risk, which definitely is a risk to do that. So you gotta kind of choose whether to do that. One of the other options is, that again, I'm just saying in some areas, they have maximum setbacks. So if a building was to come down and be torn down in this area, say it's this one here or any of these others in the overlay, you create a maximum setback so that you are requiring that the next building that be built right up to the street. So it encourages, again, that pedestrian, because if you can imagine if this came down and somebody just put a little tiny building back here, now you've got all this space, who knows what, maybe somebody will put parking there. Well, it might meet that person's need, and that may be all they want to do, but, and they'll allow for a lot of parking, but is that good for the greater good for the community? So some people put maximum setbacks, they put maximum lot widths, maximum lot sizes. Or if you have, let's say somebody owned half this block, there's a thing called form-based codes where you require that every 75 or 50 feet, there be a different, slightly different building face. So it feels like you're walking to a different store as you're walking down the street. You don't create just one giant flat wall that's not very interesting. So then you talk about aesthetics. It's not just aesthetics, because you're not necessarily going for color and that kind of thing. You're going for a diversity, some similarity, but some diversity. So as you're walking down the street, you feel like you're not passing a giant Walmart, which you may or may not want you downtown. But again, just going over some options of what some zoning can do, not necessarily that this is appropriate here right now, but they, like you said, it's trade-offs. You could allow everything in your downtown right now and fill up your storefronts, but is it going to meet your long-term economic development goals and land use goals?
And there wasn't any parking lot.
Yeah.
And that was the whole fault.
Anybody else have anything they want to talk about?
If not, if I could quickly respond to a couple of things. There were the sign inventory, or the sign enforcement, we recognize as a problem, and our new, a new guy that we brought on is a part-time planner, half plan reviewer and half zoning enforcement person, and his first task, and he's going to complete it here in the next week, he's already started on a sign inventory of the downtown to see, and we'll go through that. We did a sign inventory 2 years ago?
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
About two years ago, and the new one will indicate to us what kind of enforcement issues we have right now. So it's, there are a lot of signs that come and go in downtown, as you all know, even better than I do. So it's tough to keep up with, and he's going to be helping with that. As far as getting stuff like an exit strategy, there are options in some areas to do surety bonds. If you have, when I was working in Mackinac City, the water park went in, and there was a lot of concerns about what would happen if the water park went bust, and it did go bust. Part of the future planning that they did when they approved it is that they required as a contingency either a surety bond for the value of the cost of removing everything, so it could bring it down at least to ground level and get rid of it, so it wasn't sitting there as a big abandoned water park on the highway, which would have been difficult for the community. Yeah.
They didn't have enough bond.
So they could either do a surety bond or show that the salvage value was greater than the cost of removal, and that's what they ended up doing in the end. They got a document from a salvage company that indicated that and that's what ended up happening. So that's something that is an option for zoning. It's often difficult, and it's not, you don't want to plan for failure. And a lot of times the new buildings, the new uses that are coming in are in existing buildings that you want to have people in. So that's just another option. Thanks.
It's an option, but if you apply it, it's going to turn away a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
Somebody that's coming in thinks they might make it, they're not going to be able to afford a surety bond to
Yeah, they are
a
expensive.
performance bond.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a lot of it has to do with the uniqueness too, like the water park, that was a unique situation. You talked about a building.
Yeah.
Somebody leaves the building's still there, it's not going to be an eyesore. The building's there, somebody else can use it, or the case of the pontoon boat, are they gonna move it? It's for sale, it's been for sale for 2 months, it's been sitting there. I mean, so who's gonna move it? It's gonna stay there forever, or people may walk away from it, you don't know.
So night it might just roll into the river there.
Well, yeah, we can make sure that happens.
Float away.
It's on wheels, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on the overlays or the village center?
Did we address the vetting issue or concern accurately or sufficiently?
Well, I know you said that it would be tough to do to, go away and do it.
People
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's hindsight now. There were certain things, I know you and I, Scott, had talked before about the pontoon boat, and, there was maybe if we'd done a little more questioning or homework, we would have realized that there wasn't enough parking there for the boats that go in, and the problem they had with the next door neighbor and the fence they put up, and there was a lot of different issues. I was told that happened when they put that in there, with the neighbor too, and the parking in front, who won't, because parking belongs to everybody in the village center, and so there were issues on where they could park, where they put their spool for a table out in front of their place and things like that. So I know there was some bad blood between the two owners right there, but that, is that a planning problem or zoning? I don't know.
See where
Yeah,
that could be handled.
it's just important to understand that first of all, in a nutshell, of course, we've reviewed it before. Zoning is the use of land and the placement of buildings. It's kind of that simple. And it's important to also know that when the planning commission's reviewing some of these uses, they have to do it by specific standards. And everybody should be treated equal that brings an application in front of the planning commission based on those specific standards. And so it's hard to otherwise vet viability of businesses based on a standard that is meant to review the use and the placement of the buildings on the land.
No, because, I mean, that's a unique situation, because they only had 20 feet, and, the definition of a village center says you could put a facility in there, plus it was on wheels, so, I mean, there was a lot of different variables on that, so it's hard to predict what would happen. I mean, if it turned out to be a great place and people were flocking to go in there and the owners got along, and we probably wouldn't be talking about it right now, but that's just an example of what could happen, I guess, in our area. So.
Okay, let's finish up our meeting here. Do we have any other new business? Nope. Okay, staff report?
I have nothing to add at this time.
Just that, although we won't go into details, and obviously we can't talk about it because it's still in court, but the appeal is being taken to the Michigan Court of Appeals for the Granite Beach Association lawsuit, so that's all.
Okay, any planning commission comments?
I have one.
Yes.
And I know that we're working on mobile truck units, but I was also in a city 2 weeks ago that they also had like trolley, like you could buy, a hot dog stand. That was regulated. Now this was in the city, and it was very nicely done. I mean, a lot of people bought their hot dog or brats or whatever, but I think it could get out of hand too. So I just thought I would throw that into the mix. They closed at night, they had specific hours that they worked. And when it was time to close up, a guy with a pickup showed up and they loaded everything up, cleaned the area, and left. You'd never know they were there until the next day when it was time for them to open up again, and they came back. But
it's likely falls under the mobile food unit of our definition.
I would think it probably does.
Keep those things in mind.
I just thought that I should mention it since I had some personal experience with it and saw it. And I'm not sure with some of our definitions if somebody couldn't, but I don't know if all the things are there to have it cleaned up, done, gone. They did a nice job on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it might have been limited to how many could be in the little park too. It was a little park right downtown, kind of. But they may have had a limit for how many stands. At this time of year in October, they had one.
Yeah, I would make sure in the food truck ordinance that you look at what type of truck they had, because we had a guy, not to keep prolonging this, but he had a trailer behind an old pickup truck that was rusted out, and he had a grill on the back of it, and he was selling barbecue out of it on the lighting store property this summer, so. So that's a food truck, right?
It probably
Yeah.
is.
I don't think he was there too many times.
Okay, any other planning commission comments? Do we have any public comments?
Thank you for holding this meeting tonight. Appreciate y'all coming here.
Yeah, I do too.
Thanks.
I'm glad we came down.
I'm glad we can talk,
Yes.
and not just kind of
Good stuff.
Yeah, very good.
backstabbing.
What are you
and-
saying,
yeah.
there's something in this building, or is that in here?
You never know. Okay, if we have nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, thanks, everybody.